There's a moment every man faces. It doesn't come with thunder or warning bells. It comes quietly. A half smile that cuts too deep. A joke that feels like a jab. A glance that makes you feel small, and you tell yourself, she didn't mean it. She was just tired. It's not a big deal. But here's the truth. It is. Disrespect never kicks down the door. It creeps in through silence. It wears the mask of charm. It hides behind beauty, intimacy, and emotional attachment. And the most dangerous thing a man can do is ignore it when it's subtle. We live in a world that tells men to be patient, to be nice, to avoid conflict, to explain it away. But patience without standards isn't virtue. It's self-betrayal. Respect doesn't vanish overnight. It's eroded in quiet moments. When you let that eye roll slide, when you laugh at her sarcasm to avoid tension, when you keep showing up for someone who keeps chipping away at your dignity. You think you're keeping the peace, but you're slowly teaching her one thing. He doesn't respect himself enough to walk away. And once that message is clear to her, there's no going back. You can't demand respect later for boundaries you never set. You can't fix what you never stood for. A confident man doesn't explode. He doesn't chase. He observes. And when needed, he distances. Not to punish her, but to protect himself. The way a woman behaves when she thinks you're not watching, that's who she really is. And the way you respond, that's who you really are. The truth is brutal. If you let her cross the line once, she will redraw the line closer every time. So stop making excuses for her. Stop shrinking to keep her comfortable. Your silence is not strength if it costs you your self-worth. The moment you recognize disrespect is the moment you get to choose who you are. Not a victim, not a beggar, but a man who refuses to be slowly erased. Way 1. Recognize disrespect early. Disrespect doesn't always show up as shouting or insults. Sometimes it's softer, a delayed reply, a smirk instead of support, a sarcastic joke that lands like a slap. And if you're not paying close attention, you'll dismiss it. You'll say, she's just stressed, or it's not that serious. But here's the thing, it always starts small, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. You don't need to explode. You don't need to teach her a lesson. In fact, a wise man does the opposite. He steps back, quietly. He lets the distance speak. He lets the absence echo. Because when someone shifts their tone with you, you're allowed to shift your energy too. Not as a strategy, not as a punishment, but as a sign. This no longer reflects my standards. And when you make that shift early, you save your soul from slow erosion. You don't need a dramatic conversation to reclaim your self-worth. You just need action, presence, clarity. A man who respects himself isn't afraid of losing people. He's afraid of losing himself by staying too long where he isn't valued. That kind of man doesn't chase apologies. He doesn't beg to be understood. He simply leaves the room when the energy no longer matches his purpose. And no, it's not cold, it's not arrogant, it's self-discipline, it's emotional maturity. It's what separates men of depth from boys chasing attention. Recognizing red flags early doesn't mean you judge too fast. It means you understand patterns. You trust your gut, and you walk when something scratches your soul in the wrong direction, because small signs grow. What begins as eye-rolling turns into raised voices. What starts with passive-aggressive comments becomes full-blown contempt. And by the time you finally decide to speak up, it might be too late. The damage has already shaped the dynamic. The standard has already dropped. And worse, you dropped it. That's why you don't wait. You notice. You act. You reclaim your frame before she tries to reshape it. Look at the men who command respect. They don't explain themselves 3 times. They don't hand out access like candy. They don't argue for their value. They observe. They withdraw. They protect their peace. Like it's sacred, because it is. If you want to build unshakable confidence, start with this. Pay attention to how people treat you. When they no longer feel the need to impress you, that's when the truth shows. That's when masks drop. And that's when you decide, are you a man who teaches others how to treat him by what he allows? Or are you the one who quietly walks away before dignity turns into desperation? Because the man who recognizes disrespect early never has to beg for respect later. Way 2. Stop over-explaining yourself. There's a moment every man has lived, whether he wants to admit it or not. You speak your truth. You say no. You draw a line. And then she pauses, frowns, asks why, and before you know it, you're already justifying yourself. Paragraph after paragraph, explanation after explanation. Not because you did something wrong, but because you were afraid to be misunderstood. It feels like communication. It feels like being open, but it's not. It's a quiet surrender. A man who explains himself constantly is handing over his power 1 sentence at a time. What started as honesty becomes a performance, a desperate attempt to hold on to approval, to dodge conflict, to stay liked. But the more you explain yourself, the more invisible you become. Because a woman doesn't respect a man who over-explains. She reads that energy immediately, even if she never says a word. She senses when you're no longer leading, but asking for permission. Confident men don't justify their existence. They don't argue their worth. They speak once, with clarity, and let their conviction do the talking. Because respect doesn't require a defense. It requires presence. And that's the secret most men miss. When you try too hard to be understood, you stop being respected. The root of this habit? Fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of rejection. Fear of being seen as too much or not enough. So you soften your voice. You round your edges. You try to explain your boundaries like you're apologizing for having them. But here's the hard truth. The more you explain yourself to someone who disrespects you, the more you teach them that your standards are negotiable. And once she senses that, once she knows that she can question, push, prod, you've already lost control of the frame. It becomes a cycle. You speak, she questions. You clarify, she resists. You explain again, she doubts more. And soon, you're trapped. chasing her understanding like it's oxygen while your own clarity suffocates. But here's what confident men do differently. They don't lecture. They don't plead. They set their standards calmly, and then they move on. No applause needed. No validation required. They trust that if someone values them, they'll understand. And if they don't, that's information, not an invitation to explain more. Because a woman who respects you doesn't need a monologue to honor your boundary. And a woman who doesn't respect you will never be convinced by one. This isn't about being cold. It's about being grounded. It's about emotional sovereignty, the power to hold your position without demanding others agree with it. Men who master this are rare, and they're unforgettable. They speak less, but their words weigh more. They don't debate their direction, they walk it. They don't micromanage reactions, they manage their own presence. And in a world full of noise, that silence becomes power. It creates mystery, it builds gravity, it demands respect. Not because you asked for it, but because you became the kind of man who commands it. And women feel this deeply, because some women test men not out of cruelty, but out of instinct, to see if the man in front of them can hold frame. If he stands firm or folds into a puddle of explanations every time she questions his stance. And every time you spiral into explanation, you teach her that she is the authority over your truth. But when you answer once and stop there, something shifts. She sees that her disapproval won't bend you, that you're not trying to be liked, you're being true. And that's when her respect begins. Not because you fought for it, but because you didn't. This is what real strength looks like. Not volume, not debate, but quiet clarity. The ability to live your values without always needing them to be understood. So the next time you feel that urge to explain, to defend, to prove, pause. Ask yourself, am I sharing to connect, or am I explaining to survive? If it's the latter, let it go. Your value doesn't live in how well you're understood. It lives in how deeply you stand by who you are. Way 3. Create and maintain clear boundaries. There comes a time in a man's life when he no longer seeks to be liked, he seeks to be respected. And that shift begins when he draws the line, not in anger, but in clarity. Boundaries are not about building walls, they are about building foundations. When a man begins to truly respect himself, one of the first things he does, without being told, is establish clear boundaries. He's not loud about it. He doesn't issue ultimatums. He simply lives by standards that protect his peace and preserve his value. A boundary isn't punishment. It's a personal code that says, this is how I allow myself to be treated. If someone crosses that line repeatedly, they lose access, not out of spite, but out of principle. The mistake many men make is thinking that tolerance equals strength. So they stay silent. They allow sarcasm, passive-aggressive jabs, emotional manipulation, and repeated disrespect to slide, all in the name of keeping the peace. But what they're actually doing is training her to disrespect them. Silence teaches her that you'll accept it, that she can roll her eyes at your dreams, that she can weaponize her emotions when she wants control, that she can treat your time like an afterthought. and you'll still show up. Eventually, she stops seeing you as a man with direction. She sees someone who folds. The most grounded men don't need to fight to be taken seriously. They don't raise their voices. They don't demand reverence. They simply uphold their lines. And when a line is crossed, they step back, not to punish her, but to protect their integrity. If you don't enforce boundaries, you lose more than her respect. You lose yourself. You become the version of you she can mold. And slowly, without noticing, you let go of the man you were meant to be. A boundary might sound like this: I don't stay in conversations that become toxic. Or, if you manipulate me emotionally, I remove myself. It's not cruel, it's clear. And the key isn't what you say, it's what you follow through on. Boundaries aren't words, they're actions. Setting a boundary doesn't mean you're closed off emotionally. It means you're emotionally disciplined. You know your limits, and you're not afraid to honor them. She might not like it, especially if she's used to running the emotional show. She might test your resolve. She might push back harder than ever before. That's not the problem. That's the test. Will you hold your ground or fall into old habits? Men who fear losing her often crumble. They explain. They justify. They apologize for simply wanting respect. But the man who holds the line earns something far more powerful than agreement. He earns respect. Maybe not immediately, maybe not even openly, but deep down, she feels it. She may fight the structure, but she won't forget it. Because women don't admire men they can control. They admire men they can't shake. And here's what happens when you start living with clear boundaries. You don't just change your relationship, you change your entire life. You stop saying yes when your soul is screaming no. You stop being available to those who are never present for you. You stop compromising your identity just to keep someone around. And that inner shift, it shows. People can feel it in your voice, in your presence, in the way you no longer chase approval. Your boundaries become silent declarations. I value myself, and you don't get to treat me otherwise. Not everyone will like the new you, especially those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. But that's the point. A man who knows where he stands isn't afraid of who walks away, because he's not building comfort. He's building a kingdom, and not everyone is meant to live inside it. Way 4. Control your emotional responses. There comes a moment in every man's life when he must decide, will he be led by his emotions or will he lead them? That decision, quiet and internal, separates the grounded man from the one who gets swept away. Most men don't lose power because they speak too little. They lose it because they react too much. They let their emotions hijack the moment. They yell, they argue, they over-explain. And in doing so, they reveal something dangerous, that they are controlled by the very thing they should be mastering. When a woman disrespects you, whether it's through sarcasm, dismissiveness, or subtle digs, your instinct might be to defend yourself, to fire back, to make her understand. But here's the truth. The more you react, the more control you give away. You're not showing strength. You're showing volatility. And volatility is never respected. The man who earns lasting respect isn't the one who raises his voice. It's the one who doesn't need to. He doesn't get pulled into every emotional exchange. He doesn't argue to prove his point. He responds with calm, with clarity, with silence, when needed. That restraint isn't weakness, it's discipline. Discipline over your tone, over your body language, over your urge to match fire with fire. This kind of control takes practice. It starts with noticing the small signs, your heart rate climbing, your breath tightening, your jaw clenching. Most men miss that signal. They charge ahead, letting emotions speak for them. But the man who has mastered himself, he pauses, he breathes, he chooses whether the situation even deserves a response. Because not every battle is worth fighting. Not every insult deserves your energy. And that's what women sense, even when they don't say it out loud. They know when a man can't handle pressure, when he's reactive, when he's emotionally exposed. And that exposure, it doesn't attract respect, it erodes it. A woman may test you, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. She wants to know if you're steady, if you'll hold your ground when she storms, if you'll remain calm when she's emotional. And if you can't, if you respond to every mood, every jab, every wave, she'll start to see you as unstable, even if she never admits it. But when you stay calm, not because you're cold, but because you've grown, because you've trained yourself to stay centered, something shifts. She sees that you're not reactive, you're reliable. You're not playing emotional chess just to win an argument. You're leading with presence. That presence, more than words, builds respect, more than status, more than good looks. Because presence signals something deeper, control. And women crave it, not control over them, but control over yourself. They're drawn to a man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't get pulled into chaos, who listens, observes, and responds only when it's necessary. Here's the irony. When you master emotional control, you become more powerful without ever needing to prove it. You speak less. But when you do speak, it hits harder. Your silence becomes louder than any outburst. And your boundaries, they're felt, not announced. When a woman crosses a line, you don't need to explode. You say, calmly, "I don't accept being spoken to like that." And then you walk away if the behavior continues. No threats, no drama, just a man honoring his standards. And that's what changes everything. Because the moment she realizes that your peace is non-negotiable, she has a choice: rise to meet your standard or fall away. If she's emotionally mature, she adjusts. If not, she resists, and you'll see who she really is. But the point isn't to change her, it's to remain unchanged by her emotional storms. That's the strength you cultivate. That's the power you protect. Because emotional control isn't just about relationships, it's about life. It's how you move through conflict, how you handle pressure at work, how you lead others when everything is falling apart. You become the man others look to when things go wrong, not because you have all the answers, but because you don't panic, you don't react, you respond. That makes you rare, that makes you remembered. The world is full of noise. Be the stillness that stands out. And the next time you feel triggered, tempted to prove yourself, tempted to raise your voice, pause. Ask yourself, am I reacting or am I responding? Am I acting from emotion or from principle? Am I fighting for respect or showing that I already have it? Because the man who commands respect doesn't chase it, he lives it. And when you live with that kind of inner peace, with that kind of control, you don't just change how women treat you, you transform how you treat yourself. Way 5. Pull back your attention. Sometimes the most powerful move a man can make is to simply step back, not with drama, not with anger, just with quiet, unshakable dignity. When a woman begins to treat you with disregard, ignoring your time, violating your boundaries, or treating your presence as routine, the answer is not more effort. It's not longer texts, louder explanations, or desperate attempts to win her back. The answer is absence. Your attention, as a man, is one of the most valuable currencies you own. And like any currency, when you spend it on someone who doesn't earn it, its value plummets. Most men have been conditioned to believe they must fix things through presence, through constantly proving, explaining, giving. But this only reinforces a dangerous pattern that her approval is more important than your self-respect. And the moment she senses that, the dynamic shifts. She holds the power, and you become the man who chases what weakens him. But when you pull back, something begins to change. You're no longer trying to convince her of your worth, you're embodying it. You're no longer available on demand. And that creates contrast, a vacuum, a pause that forces her to notice. You become a question in her mind, not a background fixture. This is not about playing games. It's not coldness or punishment. It's discipline. Discipline to protect your energy. Discipline to walk away when you are no longer valued. Discipline to invest that attention, once given to her, into your own growth, fitness, peace, and purpose. And that shift, it radiates. She begins to notice you're no longer reactive, no longer answering every message, attending every moment she decides to offer. And that stillness, that absence, speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Because women are wired to test boundaries, consciously or unconsciously. They push not to destroy, but to discover what kind of man are you. If you always respond, always return, always give, even in the face of disrespect, then the answer is clear. You're the man who fears loss more than he loves himself. But when you stop dancing to her tune, she has to face a truth she didn't expect. You're not afraid to walk away. You're not afraid to be alone. You're not afraid to choose your self-worth over her attention. And that's where everything begins to change. See, pulling back your attention is not rejection, it's reflection. It says, I value my time too much to waste it convincing someone who doesn't see me. It's not vengeful. It's not passive-aggressive. It's clarity. It's power. And the men who master this quiet strength, they become unforgettable, not because they shouted, but because they disappeared. They didn't need to slam doors or write long paragraphs. They just stopped showing up where they were no longer appreciated. And in doing so, they restored the most sacred part of themselves, their dignity. Sometimes, the strongest message you'll ever send is your absence. If she responds with maturity, she'll step up, she'll adjust. If she doesn't, she'll fade, and in her place, space opens for someone who sees your worth. Either way, you win. Because the goal isn't to be chased, it's to be respected. And respect begins the moment you show that your presence is earned, not given freely. A man who can pull back without resentment, without fear, without begging, is a man who has mastered himself. That energy is rare. That energy is magnetic. That energy rewrites the story. And from that moment on, you stop chasing validation, because you've already found it. in yourself. Now, listen closely. The world teaches men that effort equals love. But in reality, misplaced effort is a sign of misaligned values. The more you give to someone who doesn't appreciate you, the more invisible you become. So stop overgiving, stop explaining, stop proving, start observing, start honoring, start walking. Silence will tell her what words never could. Your absence will speak volumes, and your redirection to your purpose, to your peace, to your own evolution will become the most attractive thing you've ever done. Way 6. Walk away entirely. Sometimes the most powerful move a man can make is to walk away, quietly, firmly, and without looking back. No dramatic exit, no ultimatums, just a calm decision that whispers, "I refuse to accept this any longer." Walking away from a woman who consistently disrespects you is not weakness. It's the deepest expression of self-respect. It's the moment you draw the line, not to hurt her, but to protect yourself, your peace, your dignity, your identity. Because here's the truth, some people won't respect you until they feel the weight of your absence. Every time you ignore the disrespect, every time you brush off the insults, the manipulation, the emotional games, you slowly chip away at your own worth. And over time, you begin to believe that love requires discomfort, that respect is optional, that pain is part of the price. But the moment you walk away, everything changes. You don't just send her a message, you send one to yourself. It says, "I choose me." It says, "I refuse to shrink just to keep someone else comfortable." You reclaim your power, not by shouting, but by leaving. This doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't mean you weren't willing to fix things. It means you finally realized you can't heal what she's not willing to change. Good-hearted men often fall into the trap of fixing. They try harder, wait longer, hope deeper. But some women only respond to action, not words. They'll test how far they can push before you break. And if you stay, after all the disrespect, you teach her that her behavior costs nothing. But when you leave, when you go silent, when you disappear from her daily life, she's left with the echo of everything she once took for granted. That's not revenge, that's reality. You didn't leave to punish her. You left because you refused to suffer, because staying would have meant betraying yourself. When a man walks away with quiet dignity, he doesn't need explanations. His absence becomes the message, and it speaks louder than any angry words ever could. Remaining in toxic spaces for too long distorts your perception. You start thinking it's normal, that maybe you deserve it, that if you were better, she'd treat you better. But walking away is how you shatter that illusion. And yes, it's hard, especially when feelings are involved. But hard doesn't mean wrong. Often, the right decision is the one that hurts the most in the beginning. With every step you take away from disrespect, you return to yourself. You reconnect with the version of you that knew peace, had standards, and refused to be mistreated. That man is still inside you, waiting for you. On the other side of letting go, he doesn't beg for love. He doesn't chase approval. He doesn't argue for basic decency. He knows his worth. And that's what walking away truly means. Not just leaving her behind, but returning to the man you were always meant to be. Here's the truth. Most men only discover after the damage is done. When you finally walk away, Not with anger, not with noise, but with calm certainty, your world begins to expand. You stop chasing validation and start attracting respect. You stop begging for peace and begin building it from within. That shift changes everything. You're no longer defined by how others treat you. You begin to define yourself. You set the tone. You set the rules. And most importantly, you start to live a life where your boundaries aren't up for debate. You don't leave to win. You leave because staying costs too much. Your energy, your identity, your dignity. And once you understand that respect isn't optional, it's essential, your silence becomes louder than any argument. Because when a man chooses himself, not out of pride, but out of principle, he doesn't just escape pain. He unlocks his power. He no longer fits into places that ask him to shrink. He rises into a life that reflects who he truly is.